You are about to witness a moment that defied all expectations, a clash so monumental it reverberated through the halls of power and forever changed the landscape of televised justice. For decades, one woman reigned supreme, her gavel a symbol of unchallenged authority, her gaze capable of silencing the most defiant. But what happens when that immovable force meets an unstoppable will? What unfolds when America's toughest judge tries to silence a rising political star, only to find herself on the receiving end of a reply that shocks an entire nation? This isn't just a story. It's a masterclass in courage, intellect, and the power of standing your ground. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever wanted to see true authority challenged with grace in undeniable facts, then you are in the right place. Hit that like button right now, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single moment of these epic showdowns, and leave a comment below telling us who you think will win this battle of wits. Because what you're about to read is not just compelling television, it's a lesson in how to face down power when it overreaches, and how to do it with intelligence, preparation, and an unwavering spirit. The atmosphere in Judge Judy's courtroom was tense, almost crackling. Every camera angle, every hushed whisper from the audience seemed to amplify the palpable anticipation. This wasn't any regular small claims dispute over a lost pet or a fender bender. No, this was a high-stakes, special episode featuring one of the most talked about and, to some, most controversial young lawmakers in Washington. The air was thick with the weight of expectation, a silent demand for the legendary Judge Judy Sheindlin to deliver one of her signature on-air takedowns. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat firmly at the defendant's table, a picture of composure amidst the brewing storm. Her shoulders were squared, her eyes fixed straight ahead, an almost unnerving calm radiating from her despite the commotion that swirled around her. She was a force in her own right, known for her sharp intellect and an unyielding commitment to her convictions, qualities that had both propelled her ascent and drawn the ire of the establishment. Across from her, Judge Judy Sheindlin, known across America as the toughest judge on television, leaned forward from her bench. Her iconic stern look, usually reserved for the most egregious of litigants, was now more intense than usual, a clear signal that she was more than ready for a fight. "Congresswoman Crockett," Judge Judy's voice sliced through the room like a razor, cutting through the silence and instantly seizing everyone's attention. "I've been hearing all about your theatrics in Congress. Honestly, I think someone needs to remind you what respect for authority looks like." The words hung in the air, a direct challenge, a public rebuke from the highest-rated judge in television history. The courtroom froze. This wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a public spectacle, a showdown between two titans of their respective arenas. Judge Judy had delivered her opening salvo, a classic move designed to assert dominance and put her opponent on the defensive. But what unfolded next would become the most watched moment in the show's decades-long history, a clip destined to go viral and skyrocket Jasmine Crockett's political image to a whole new level. "Your Honor," Crockett began, her voice calm but edged with steel, a subtle tremor of power beneath the composed surface. "With all due respect, I'd suggest you double-check your facts before coming at me." The room erupted in gasps. No one talks back to Judge Judy, ever. But Jasmine Crockett was about to go toe-to-toe with her, and what she said next would leave the legendary judge completely stunned for the first time in the show's 25 years on air. This was just the beginning. The stage was set for a confrontation that would redefine power, respect, and the very nature of public service. To truly grasp the explosive nature of this confrontation, you first need to understand the two powerhouse women at its heart and the vastly different worlds they represented. Judge Judy Sheindlin, at 81, had ruled courtroom television for over 2 decades. She'd built an empire not just on legal acumen, but on an almost theatrical persona. Sharp, brutally honest, and entirely allergic to what she famously called nonsense. Her no-frills style, rapid judgments, and razor-sharp commentary had made her one of the highest-paid personalities on television. Born and raised in Brooklyn, she'd fought her way through law school, served years as a family court judge, and eventually became a household name. She was used to being the smartest voice in the room, the ultimate arbiter, and she rarely met a challenger she couldn't silence with a glance or a perfectly timed zinger. But this time, It was different. What made this moment so dangerous for Judge Judy was that she'd been quietly growing more annoyed watching Jasmine Crockett's meteoric rise in national politics. To someone like Judy, who had made her name enforcing rules and respecting hierarchy, Crockett's aggressive questioning of powerful people felt like defiance, like showboating. It was a challenge to the very order Judy believed in, a perceived lack of deference that grated against decades of ingrained judicial philosophy. She saw a young upstart disrupting the established decorum, and in her courtroom, that was simply unacceptable. On the other side stood Jasmine Crockett, everything Judge Judy wasn't. At 42, she was a former civil rights lawyer who had carved her own path in Congress by confronting the most powerful figures without flinching, be it federal judges or Supreme Court nominees. She hadn't inherited her position. She had earned it, step by step, by out-preparing and outperforming everyone in the room. Crockett grew up knowing that respect had to be earned, not demanded. Her background in law taught her to lean on facts, on irrefutable evidence. Her experience as a black woman in politics taught her that she'd need to be twice as sharp to get half the credit. She was not easily rattled by titles, age, or status. What mattered to her was truth and justice, and she carried that conviction like an invisible shield. This moment wasn't just TV drama, it was a collision of two completely different views of power and respect. Judge Judy represented the traditional guard, respect authority first, question later. Crockett symbolized the new wave, authority must prove itself through integrity and action. Whoever came out on top would signal something bigger. What kind of leadership America was ready to follow? Would it be the seasoned voice of experience or the sharp mind of someone unwilling to back down? Everyone in the courtroom felt the weight of what was about to unfold. Two of the boldest, brightest women in the country were about to clash, and only one of them would leave with their reputation fully intact. The confrontation began the moment Judge Judy called the room to order. "I've been following your time in Congress," she began, her tone heavy with disapproval, "and frankly, I haven't been impressed." There was an uneasy shift among the audience. It was already clear this wasn't going to be a neutral exchange. It had gotten personal fast. "You seem to think that raising your voice and being combative somehow equals effectiveness. But what I see is someone young who still doesn't know how to properly show respect to those with more experience." Crockett didn't flinch. Her face stayed neutral, but those familiar with her could spot the subtle tension forming around her eyes. Judge Judy had just crossed a line, questioning her intelligence and her respect. "Your Honor," Crockett replied smoothly, her voice steady, "I'd be more than willing to go over my record with you. I think you might actually find it enlightening." But Judge Judy wasn't there to have a conversation. She had come to deliver one of her signature on-air takedowns. "Don't use that tone with me," she snapped, her voice rising. "I've been practicing law since you were even born. I've seen countless attorneys think they're the smartest in the room, and you know what they all have in common? They're usually wrong." The air grew tighter. Judge Judy was clearly trying to assert control through age and authority. "You want to talk about achievements?" she added, her voice laced with self-satisfaction. "I've been on television for 25 years, earning more than most politicians ever will, because I know exactly how to deal with people like you." Crockett leaned in just slightly. Her voice stayed calm, but it carried a sharper edge. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I'm not sure what you mean by people like me. Could you clarify that?" That question hung there, quiet, but explosive. The courtroom felt it. She had just put Judge Judy on dangerous ground. Even Judy, perhaps sensing that she had overstepped, shifted tactics. "What I mean," she said, trying to recover, "is politicians who think they can walk into long-standing institutions and flip everything upside down without earning their stripes. You've barely been in Congress for a few years, and already you think you have the right to vet Supreme Court nominees and federal judges?" And that right there was the moment Crockett had been waiting for. Judge Judy had just shown that she fundamentally misunderstood how Crockett's role in government actually worked.
"Your Honor," Crockett said, her voice now more commanding, shaped by years of courtroom battles and high-stakes congressional hearings, "I think there may be some confusion about how our constitutional system operates." The energy in the room shifted again, this time palpably in her favor. Crockett wasn't retreating, she was getting ready to strike back. Judge Judy, still thinking she had the upper hand, pushed harder. "Don't try to school me on the Constitution, young lady," she snapped, her voice hitting the signature note that made her a household name. "I've been interpreting the law longer than you've been alive. The problem with your generation is you think you know everything, but you don't understand institutional respect." She pointed straight at Crockett, a theatrical gesture that usually signaled the end of an argument. "You want my opinion? I think you're just another grandstander who uses drama to get attention. Real lawyers handle their work quietly, with dignity." But in that moment, Judy had unknowingly stepped right into Crockett's trap. By attacking her professionalism and credentials, she had opened the door for Crockett to do exactly what she was best at: defend herself with preparation, facts, and unshakable composure. Crockett leaned back, the faintest hint of a smile forming on her lips, a smile that those who'd seen her in action during high-pressure hearings knew well. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed the perfect opening. "Your Honor," she said coolly, pulling out a folder from her briefcase with deliberate calm, "since my qualifications and understanding of constitutional law are now on trial, I think this would be the perfect moment to go over some key details." Judge Judy raised an eyebrow, still confident, still dismissive. "And what exactly could you possibly have in there that's relevant to any of this?" "Well then," Crockett said, unfolding a set of papers with precise, almost surgical calm, "let's begin with something you mentioned earlier about respecting institutions and conducting business quietly." The room fell into total silence. Everyone could feel it. Crockett was laying the groundwork for something big, something unprecedented in this courtroom. "You noted that you've spent decades interpreting the law," she continued, her voice steady and clear. "That's certainly true, but I think the audience might be curious to examine how you've applied that legal understanding in some of your most high-profile rulings." For the first time, Judge Judy's confident expression wavered. She was not used to being on the receiving end of scrutiny, especially not in her own courtroom, on her own show. Crockett slid several documents out from her folder. "Your Honor, I took the time to review a few of your most publicized legal decisions during your tenure as a family court judge before you transitioned to television." That caught everyone off guard. Never before had someone brought Judge Judy's real-world judicial record into question, let alone on her own show. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Judy demanded, though her voice now lacked the sharp bite it had earlier. "I'm simply illustrating the difference," Crockett replied evenly, "between courtroom theatrics and sound legal reasoning. Since you question my qualifications, I thought it only fair we take a closer look at yours." The audience was hooked. This wasn't a typical Judge Judy exchange. It was a legitimate legal showdown between two skilled attorneys, and the tables were undeniably turning. Crockett held up the first document. "Your Honor, here's a 1987 case where you denied a single-mother child support. Your justification was that she should have made better life choices rather than turn to the court system for help." Judge Judy's cheeks began to flush. "That decision was based on the facts at hand." "Perhaps," Crockett said, flipping to the next page. "But here's what's relevant. 3 years later, the appellate court overturned that decision, stating that your reasoning failed to meet legal standards and relied too heavily on personal opinion." The crowd murmured in disbelief. Judge Judy, America's courtroom icon, was being fact-checked live, and it was clear she hadn't anticipated it. What happened next changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Clearly rattled, Judy made a critical misstep. She stood abruptly, her voice sharp and defensive. "How dare you stand in my courtroom and challenge my legal decisions? I don't care what some appellate court said. I know how to run a courtroom." But Crockett didn't even flinch. In fact, she leaned into the moment. "With respect," she said, her voice cutting through Judy's outburst, "this brings us to an important distinction. This isn't actually your courtroom, is it?" The silence that followed was thick, as if the air itself had stopped moving. "What did you just say?" Judy asked, narrowing her eyes, her usual command replaced by genuine bewilderment. Crockett rose from her chair, her presence commanding, her years of constitutional law experience now fully visible. "I said," she repeated, her voice clear and unwavering, "this is not a real courtroom. This is a set. You're not a sitting judge. You're a retired jurist who now works in entertainment. You arbitrate televised disputes for an audience. That's very different than holding actual judicial power." The crowd gasped. Someone had just said out loud what no one had dared to admit, and it had hit Judge Judy like a hammer.
"The authority you're trying to assert over me as a sitting member of Congress," Crockett continued, her voice now resonating with the full weight of her office, "doesn't exist. I am an elected federal official. You are a private citizen working in broadcast television. Our positions in the real legal and political systems are not equivalent." For the first time in her entire career, Judge Judy was speechless. She had just been dismantled, methodically, respectfully, and with irrefutable logic. The moment was transformative. It would be replayed millions of times and taught in law schools as a textbook example of how to challenge authority without losing composure or professionalism. Still standing, Crockett spoke with calm authority. "Since we're discussing respect for institutions, allow me to clarify how ours function. As a member of the U.S. Congress, I swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. That oath includes a duty to oversee both the executive and the judiciary." She opened the next section of her folder, revealing carefully organized documents. Branches of government, including asking Supreme Court justices to account for their conduct and ethical behavior. Judge Judy attempted to cut her off, a flicker of her old fire returning, but Crockett pressed forward with the calm precision of a lawyer who'd done this hundreds of times before. "You called that grandstanding," she said, eyes locked forward. "But the Constitution not only permits Congress to perform oversight, it demands it. It's called checks and balances, and it's the backbone of how our democracy functions." She reached into her folder and pulled out a small booklet, the Constitution itself. Article 1, Section 1 grants legislative power to Congress. Article 1, Section 8 gives us authority to regulate the courts, including the Supreme Court. So when I ask questions about judicial ethics, I'm not being disrespectful, I'm doing exactly what the founders envisioned. The audience sat in complete silence, absorbing every word. This was no longer a courtroom spat. It had become a live masterclass in civics, delivered by someone who clearly understood the law better than anyone expected. "Your Honor," Crockett continued, her voice unwavering, "you said I don't understand respect for institutions. But with all due respect, I think you may not fully understand what my institutional duty actually is." But she wasn't finished yet. Crockett reached for one final document, the one that would shift the energy in the room permanently. "You also claimed that real lawyers conduct themselves quietly and professionally. That's an interesting opinion, but it's not supported by precedent." She held up a case file. In McGrain v. Dougherty, 1927, the United States Supreme Court ruled that Congress not only has the right, but the obligation to investigate government corruption and misconduct. The ruling said Congress's investigative authority is essential to informed legislation. Judge Judy stared at her, an unusual expression forming, part disbelief, part reluctant admiration. This wasn't what she had expected. She had walked in expecting a political novice and instead found herself face-to-face with a constitutional law expert. "So when I questioned Supreme Court justices about undisclosed gifts or conflicts of interest or failures to follow ethical rules," Crockett said, her tone firm but unshaken, "I'm not performing, I'm carrying out a constitutional responsibility as defined by the highest court in the country." Then Crockett shifted from case law to her own resume. "You questioned my legal background earlier. Let me clarify that, both for you and for everyone watching." She held up a single-page document outlining her credentials. "I earned my law degree from the University of Houston Law Center. I spent over a decade as a civil rights attorney, arguing and winning cases in federal courts to protect people's constitutional rights. I was elected to the Texas legislature, where I passed meaningful legislation. Then I was elected to Congress, where I now serve on the House Judiciary Committee." The contrast was unmistakable. Crockett had earned her authority through education, advocacy, and public trust, not through ratings or syndication. She said, "My qualifications to speak on constitutional matters aren't based on TV popularity. They're based on experience, education, and the confidence of voters who sent me to Washington." Then came the moment everyone would remember, the one that would echo across social media and headlines for days. "You said I don't respect institutions," Crockett said, her tone sharpened but respectful. "But what I think you really meant was, I don't defer to power for its own sake, that I don't automatically bow to someone just because they carry a title or wear a robe." She paused, I have deep respect for institutions that earn it. I respect federal judges who uphold ethical standards. I respect justices who maintain impartiality. I even respect television figures when they understand the boundaries of their influence. The implication landed immediately, and the audience felt it. But respect for institutions, she concluded, doesn't mean blind obedience to people who claim power they no longer actually hold. Then she delivered the line that would be quoted in articles, interviews, and future debates. You criticize my generation for thinking we know everything, but we don't think we know everything. We just know enough to ask the right questions of the right people at the right time. She glanced slowly around the courtroom. You built your career by holding people accountable, by demanding answers for their actions. So tell me, how is what I do in Congress any different? The silence was deafening. Crockett's parallel had landed with full force. Judge Judy had spent years confronting people on television, but when someone turned that same energy toward the powerful figure she admired, suddenly it was labeled disrespect. And Crockett's final point lingered. The real difference. When she asks hard questions, it's to Supreme Court justices with lifetime appointments, people whose decisions shape the lives of millions. And she doesn't ask for attention, she asks because it's her job. Decisions that affect millions of Americans. And when you ask tough questions, it's usually about security deposits or minor car accidents. Then, calmly and confidently, she sat down. But she wasn't finished. Your Honor, she said, looking directly at Judge Judy. Earlier you mentioned that you've earned more money than most politicians could ever dream of. That may be true, but I don't measure success in public service by money. She leaned forward slightly, her voice now full of genuine conviction. I could have stayed in private practice and made a lot more. I could have taken a high-paying job at a corporate law firm, but I didn't. I chose public service because some things matter more than a paycheck. The courtroom was still. Even Judge Judy, long known for her tough exterior, seemed to realize this moment was different. Something deeper was unfolding. So when you question my qualifications or how I do my job, Crockett added, her voice clear and unwavering, I need you to understand something. I'm not here for a paycheck or fame or television ratings. I'm here because I swore an oath, and that oath demands that I hold power accountable. I take that responsibility seriously because the Constitution demands it. And for the first time in her long career on television, Judge Judy didn't have a response. She sat back slowly in her chair, her face a mixture of surprise, reflection, and surprisingly respect.
When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its edge, the signature snap replaced by a quiet, almost reverent tone. "Congresswoman," Judge Judy said quietly, "that was quite a response." The words were soft, but they echoed through the room, carrying the weight of a monumental shift. She had made a name for herself by always having the final word, by never backing down. But today, that pattern had been broken. "I think," Judge Judy continued slowly, her gaze still fixed on Crockett, "I may have misjudged you." Crockett allowed herself a small knowing smile, a subtle acknowledgement of the victory. "That happens a lot, Your Honor," she replied, her voice calm. "I've gotten used to it." The courtroom erupted. People who had arrived expecting to see Jasmine Crockett get scolded and shut down had just witnessed the exact opposite, an extraordinary moment where she remained poised, factual, and unshaken, while turning the tables on one of TV's most formidable figures. Some in the audience stood and applauded, others recorded with their phones, already knowing they had witnessed a historic exchange. This wasn't just compelling television, it was something else entirely. A lesson in how to face down authority when it overreaches, and how to do it with intelligence, preparation, and grace. Even members of Judge Judy's own production team, people who had worked with her for years, looked stunned. None of them had ever seen her handled like this. And the aftermath was unlike anything television had seen before. As the episode wrapped, the air in the studio was electric. Judge Judy, clearly rattled, offered something almost unheard of from her, genuine respect. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said during the final credits, her voice sincere, "I owe you an apology. I walked into this thinking I knew what you stood for. I was wrong." That apology shocked even the crew. Judge Judy had built a decades-long career on never backing down, never admitting fault, and always owning the last word. But Crockett's performance had been so meticulous, so well prepared, and so respectful that even Judy had to admit she had been outmatched. Behind the scenes, producers were already discussing how to frame the episode. They knew they had something explosive on their hands. TV gold, no doubt, but also knew their star had just been publicly out-argued in front of a live audience by someone half her age. Within minutes of filming ending, clips started surfacing on social media, even though the episode wouldn't officially air for weeks. The buzz was immediate. The hashtag #JasmineSchoolsJudy was trending within an hour. Soon after, another started climbing. Hashtag #ConstitutionalBurnout. Twitter lit up with commentary and clips. Legal scholar Lawrence Tribe tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett just gave Judge Judy a masterclass in constitutional law and institutional respect. This should be required viewing for every first-year law student." Legal Twitter, which had grown used to watching members of Congress fumble through oversight hearings, was electrified. Here, at last, was someone who not only knew what she was talking about, but delivered it with surgical precision. One tweet summed up the internet's reaction perfectly. "Judge Judy, you don't respect institutions. Jasmine Crockett, I respect them enough to hold them accountable. Game over." Within minutes, the internet did what it does best. Memes flooded social platforms. One showed Crockett confidently holding a stack of legal documents with the caption, "When someone tries to school you on the law, but you actually studied law." Another featured Judge Judy's stunned expression with the words, "When the student becomes the teacher." Legal professionals across the country were watching. The American Bar Association's official Twitter account posted a clip of Crockett's constitutional breakdown with the caption, "This is why legal education matters." Law schools began contacting Crockett's office for permission to use the footage as classroom material. Harvard Law School's own constitutional law professor tweeted, "This is going into next week's lecture, an ideal example of how to professionally challenge authority." Even federal judges took notice. One, speaking anonymously to the Washington Post, said, "She explained the framework of congressional oversight better than many practicing attorneys I see in court." But the moment wasn't just a legal showcase. It had immediate political consequences. Crockett's calm dismantling of Judge Judy's authority claims resonated far beyond the courtroom. She wasn't just a viral sensation. She was now being viewed as a legitimate legal voice with real influence. Within days, she received invitations to appear on major Sunday talk shows, not as a controversial firebrand, but as a sharp, clear-eyed constitutional expert. The Speaker of the House released a rare statement saying, "Congresswoman Crockett showed the kind of poise, clarity, and depth we need more of in Congress." Her defense of constitutional principles was nothing short of outstanding. Even some Republicans privately admitted they were impressed. One GOP member of the House Judiciary Committee told reporters, "I disagree with her on just about everything politically, but that was a masterclass. She knows her constitutional law." But beyond law and politics, the moment reflected a deeper cultural shift. For years, Judge Judy had embodied unchallenged authority, the no-nonsense elder figure who always got the last word. But Crockett's response modeled a new kind of leadership, one that balances respect with readiness and professional pushback with airtight preparation. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't been rude. She had simply known more and delivered it with precision. Commentators quickly pointed out the deeper social dynamics at play. A young black woman had just calmly out-argued one of America's most recognized authority figures, not through volume, but through fact, logic, and grounded legal expertise. This, one columnist wrote, is what generational change looks like when it arrives prepared. Crockett didn't just defend herself, she defended the very mechanisms of democratic accountability. In the weeks that followed, both women saw their reputations evolve. For Crockett, it was transformative. She was no longer just known for fiery hearings. She was now being recognized as a legitimate constitutional scholar with real influence. Requests for speaking engagements poured in from law schools, civic organizations, and political forums nationwide. A book deal already in the works suddenly became a hot ticket item. Publishers now saw her as someone who could break down complex constitutional ideas in ways the public could understand. Perhaps most telling, on Capitol Hill, her colleagues began to treat her differently. Committee chairs consulted her on legal strategy. Party leaders invited her into high-level meetings. She had earned something rare in Washington: bipartisan respect. As for Judge Judy, the aftermath was more nuanced. Some criticized her for being unprepared, others praised her for ultimately showing humility. And in certain circles, her willingness to acknowledge Crockett's expertise actually added a new layer of credibility to her legacy, because even for someone known for always having the last word, this time it was what she didn't say that said everything. She was confident enough to admit when she had been wrong. But the episode also revealed something deeper: the limits of her television authority. When faced with real constitutional expertise, legal analysts were quick to point out that while Judge Judy's presence works well in small claims disputes, it doesn't carry the same weight when standing opposite someone with genuine command of federal law. What unfolded on that stage wasn't just a viral moment, it became a set of lasting lessons that rippled through America's legal and political landscape. Lesson 1: preparation outperforms intimidation. Crockett didn't win the exchange by raising her voice or dominating the room. She won by doing her homework. Every claim she made was backed by precedent, legal framework, and constitutional clarity. Her strength came from substance, not spectacle. Lesson 2: respect isn't silence, it's precision. Crockett never got personal, she never raised her voice, but she made her case with such accuracy and poise that the impact was unmistakable. She showed that you can challenge authority without being disrespectful and still be absolutely unshakable. Lesson 3: constitutional literacy matters. The episode exposed a glaring gap in public understanding of government. Crockett's ability to clearly explain how oversight works and where congressional authority begins and ends became not just impressive, but essential. Her knowledge was unshakable, and it showed just how rare that depth of understanding is among public figures. The confrontation also became a symbol of evolving leadership, what the next generation could look like: principled, well-informed, and unafraid to challenge outdated power structures. Crockett wasn't posturing, she wasn't performing, she was prepared. But perhaps the most meaningful legacy of that day was educational. Clips from the exchange began showing up in high school classrooms, college lectures, and legal seminars. Civics teachers used it to explain the balance of powers. Law professors cited it as a real-world example of effective legal argument under pressure. Even political science departments used it to explore institutional dynamics and oversight in action. It even reignited a national conversation about civic literacy, with commentators pointing out how Crockett's clarity revealed just how little most Americans understand about the government that serves them. Her approach inspired others. A growing number of young politicians began shifting away from sensationalism and turning towards substance, prioritizing real understanding over flashy soundbites. And among older political figures, there was a noticeable change in tone. It was now clear: underestimate the new generation at your own risk. Political strategists began reviewing the